Professor Pat Dolan. Is Pat there? Pat, you have the quad behind you, but where on planet Earth are you?
I'm in the heart of London, very near Leicester Square. Well, I'm actually in the London School of Economics, to be exact. So I'm in London at the moment. But I've been listening in. Great to see you all back home, and great to be with you.
It's raining, Pat, so you're not missing much. Although I am surrounded by heroes here, so maybe you are a bit jealous. Pat, you are joint founder and director of the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre in IUA Galway. And I think of you, as well as a friend, I think of you as Professor Empathy, because so much of the work you do is around this skill that we can easily describe in one word, but maybe we don't have a great understanding of what it is. You know, we've got a lot of distinguished guests in here. You have a lot of distinguished people in your phone book. He has Cillian Murphy on speed dial because he has been developing a lot of engagement training for young people, really engaging young people in this idea of empathy and how it applies to day-to-day life. Pat, you're going to speak to us now for 24 minutes on activating social empathy. Pat, all today's conference was really about putting the human at the heart of all these things, staying connected, staying motivating and motivating team dynamics. So from you, how you activate social empathy as part of that. We're taking questions in the chat. So in about 24 minutes, I'll be back to put some of your questions to Pat. But in the meantime, Pat, it's over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks to me and John. And thanks to Josephine, my colleague Josephine Hines in particular, for the very kind invitation to speak with you today and to join you from London. So what I'm going to do, hopefully, is share my screen here. That's the wrong one, that one there. And if somebody could nod and tell me that they can see that PowerPoint, because otherwise I'm in trouble. Thank you very much. That's a sign of active empathy in one go there, you see. So it's great to be with you. And what I'm going to do over the next 20 minutes is, I hope, in a way, engage you into something that you probably have thought about, but maybe not thought about it in the way that I'm going to talk to you about it. I have to say, I've been working on exploring, researching, and you'll see some of the work I'm doing on empathy over the next 20 minutes. But I have to say, it's really been over the period of COVID and my own personal experiences over COVID that I've really thought about empathy. So what I'm going to do is try and talk to you about connecting these things together. So first of all, one thing we learned, if we learned nothing else, and I heard Brent talking about the point about, you know, being locked up and locked down and locked in with others, as we all have been. But the one thing that has been there for all of us is that relationship to the bread and butter of your profession, but they're also the bread and butter of your personal life. And I sadly lost my oldest brother during COVID. He didn't die from COVID, but I went through the whole experience of not being able to connect with loved ones. And it really made me aware of, in a unique way and in a different way, of the importance of empathy. And I'm going to talk to you about a concept called presence. That's not what you're getting ready to get or give at Christmas. I mean, the concept of your presence. And I'll get into that very, very shortly. But I'd argue that, and I say this as a social science researcher as much as anything, that I think empathy has become slightly a forgotten commodity in our work and in our life. Most people don't read the instructions on a fire extinguisher until they're witnessing a fire, which is quite frightening. And most of us didn't think about empathy until we're not seeing it from others or we're not able to display it to others. I think in our work life, we become very fixated on the programs that we work with, key performance indicators, these things, and this kind of pressure, rather than we may be overlooking what is essentially, I believe, more important. And I'm saying this from the context of 8 years work in terms across education, development, research, and not meaning to frighten you with the word theory at this hour of the evening, but by trying to make theory more applicable to civic society, actually. So what is empathy? Let's look at that really quickly. Empathy is not sympathy. It's the capacity to identify and understand another person's situations, to really understand their feelings, their motives, what's going on for them. And in a way, it's the attribution of your own feelings onto another person. So it's not just about feeling sorry or having pity. It's actually been able to identify with it. And there's two ways you can do that. You can do that from the point of view of cognitive empathy, which is that you understand the other person's plight. or you can do it from the point of view of effective empathy. And effective empathy is where you actually step in their shoes. You emotionally attach yourself to their situation. And that's really interesting. In casual conversation, you probably had conversations, as I've had, with people about things like migration and migrants. And you can see the difference in the attitudes of people. Need I say, in the attitude of some world leaders who have great well-being themselves, but no empathy for others. And let's be honest, that capacity to show effective empathy has been the constant thermostat in our lives during lockdown, of not seeing loved ones, of not being able to hug other people, and the things we've all gone through. So it is innate, and it's something you cultivate, and it's something you can create. So what I mean by that is it's the ability to perceive another person's emotions. That's innate, that's in animals. That's what we can see in our natural lives as a parent, or how our parents are with us. But it's the ability or desire to understand the inner emotions. And that's what you cultivate. And then you can create yourself from the other. And this leads you to this fantastic thing, as my colleague Kate Berardi talks about, leads to active empathy. So what I'm going to do is give you some examples quickly of this, and I'm going to explore this a bit more in this triad of concepts. And then I'm going to give you two examples, one very internal to NUI Galway, which John Caulfield in particular is very well aware of because he's involved in it, and then one from my research work. So we've developed a schools program called Activating Social Empathy, or ACE, and in it, young people, either transition year students or first year, second year students, they work on understanding empathy, practicing empathy, overcoming barriers to empathy in their own lives, and putting it into action. Those 4 simple steps. Now, I would argue that though these 4 steps apply to you as much as a young person in any secondary school in Ireland. And we've had a lot of success on that program, and I'm going to show you, literally show you, demonstrate to you the way we've had one example of that success later, which I think will speak for itself. So these are the 4 steps of the education program: understanding it, practicing it, overcoming barriers to empathy, and then putting it into place. And if you think about that, that's really interesting, because it actually is the 4 ways we often think about how we connect with another person in our lives, people we're very close to: understanding, connecting with them, overcoming difficulties, and showing them that you care. It's very basic. In order to do that, you need petrol, although we shouldn't say that with COP26, but you need something in the tank for it to happen. And I would argue that Andreas Barth's model, called the presence approach, is the way that we do that. So if ever you've been out with a friend, and not alone did they not buy a drink back or pay for their meal or something, and they have this vague look on them that they're no more interested in what you're saying than the man in the moon, you know that you don't have their presence. Presence is actually about being there for others in a very genuine way. And it doesn't mean in our work that you have to focus on problem solving, just being there for others. How often have any of us had a friend who's got a medical illness, not least a cancer or something, and being there for them, or a bereavement, being there for them was key. Taking time, which we all know is essentially the most important thing we have to give often in our lives, is to understand a person's environment, but you need time to do that. And then affirming the fundamental dignity of the person, which is core to anybody in their work life or in their family and home life, is key. And believe it or not being problem focused actually can help you solve the problem. So this is Andreas Barth's 4 simple recipes. And I think these apply to work, and I think work-life balance, and I think COVID work-life balance, and COVID home-life balance. So how do you do that? Very simple, these 7 things: be open, be attentive, connect, be willing to change your opinion, your perspective. You have an opinion, it is not necessarily the correct one. Be available to the other person, have patience and time. And I love his last one: be loyal and dedicated. I have a sister who's ill, on top of having lost a brother at the moment. And the most important thing she told me lately when I visited to her doctor was that the doctor said, I'm here for you no matter what. That was the most important part of the visit for her, which is what you want to hear. So you get this, where you have presence, which I've described about, with empathy, which is a bit connecting with somebody, you get an intervention. And this leads to what I think I would call respectful practice in our work. And as John knows, because John Caulfield is involved in this, respect is one of our strongest and first values at IUA Galway in our strategic plan. And I've been honoured to work in relation to looking at this within the institute, which I work and lead on, the Institute for Life Course and Society. And very briefly, I want to use this as the first before the second example of, believe it or not, of empathy. So what we've done is we've looked at how do you understand respect, how do you do it, and how do you check if it's happening. The first thing we learned about respect in the workplace is don't put up a charter on the wall, because you're back to the fire extinguisher. People will only read it when they've done something wrong or they've been wronged by somebody else. So we did this audit of good practice. We did a survey with staff at ILAS and students in all our community. And then we build up this practice of respect. It's a daily check-in system. And then you quality assure it by having ways to make sure that you're being honorable and honest in how you respect and deal with other people. Believe me, as I've experienced, if it's the case that you're in your workplace and the work is not going right, you can deal with it. If you're disrespected or disrespectful, you won't be able to cope. It's the one that will keep you up at night. So respect is a core part of empathy. It's another way of thinking of empathy in action. And before I go to show you the example that I wanted to show you, I want to suggest something to you. So I've been very fortunate in my home life and work life, but very fortunate to be the recipient of a Fulbright scholarship to go to the US next year and to work with the Rogers Foundation, the archives of Fred Rogers. There's a movie out with Tom Hanks on the life of Fred Rogers, in which he plays Fred Rogers. Well, it's a reasonably good movie. I recommend you go to the Netflix documentary called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Mr. Rogers was able to develop preschool education before Sesame Street. His program still runs. And in it, he used puppets to display empathy and humanity. An absolutely fascinating man. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but a fascinating legacy. And I'm working on his amazing archive in the coming year in the US. But I really recommend, if you want to learn about empathy, learn about Mr. Rogers. That's just well, those of you that know me will come back and thank me. Those of you who've already seen it will know what I'm talking about. Good. So I wanted to give you a real example of this, one that really, when won't talk is cheap. So in developing our empathy program with schools, one of the things we do, we work with youth and we train them as researchers, literally train them as researchers, and they research an issue that they feel is important in their lives. And needless to say, it's one in which empathy plays a role. And one of the earliest ones we did, so what they do is they research the project, they research the problem they want to solve, but they don't read a research report. Most people who do research don't read their own reports, including me, and I do a lot of research. And believe me, if you're not an academic, you certainly won't read research reports. Let's be honest. But what the youth do is they develop 6 to 7 minute videos, and we are using these as curriculums in schools. The example I want to give you is from youth in Tala who are LGBTQI, and they were suffering homophobic bullying on a daily basis in West Tala. And the video will speak for itself. This reflects part of the work that I'm doing as UNESCO chair. I'm in London working on a global COVID study on the impact of youth at the moment. So these are very real issues. But this example from Tala is a very real example of how an issue can be looked at with solutions towards better empathy. The nice part of the story is that 5 years on from this particular video, we've been measuring homophobic bullying in 5 schools in West Tala, and it's reduced by 80%. And this video is used a lot. You'll see Killian Murphy narrates the video, and he's in the video. And Killian is a very fantastic, as John mentioned, a good friend, but a fantastic patron to the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre, to both our empathy work and our Youth as Researchers work. He's been an outstanding champion for us. So this is where I hope I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to share my screen. If you just bear me 1 sec, just get rid of this. 1 sec. Yeah, and spare me 1 more second. And can people see that on their screen? Can you see that? Somebody nod for me, please.
Yeah.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, this takes 7 minutes, so just sit back and hopefully it speaks for itself.
As patron of the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre, it gives me great pleasure to introduce this youth research video. The Centre believes that young people researching and talking to other young people about what issues directly affect them can give us a powerful insight into what matters in their lives. Ensuring the voices of young people are heard is an issue close to my heart. Research driven by youth can enable young people to add their voices and influence change on issues that matter to them. As part of the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre team at NUI Galway, youth researchers have been formally trained in research methods and have undertaken ethical and scientifically grounded social research projects. The following video is an example of how their research can be used as a tool to advocate for change. The Taille Foróige and UNESCO Centre Youth Research Group set out to explore the link between non-conforming sexualities and gender identities and negative mental health in the case of young LGBT people before they came out. Supported by the UNESCO Centre, the young researchers wanted to build on research that has already been done nationally in this area before bringing the experience of the people in their locality to the fore. First, they reviewed existing research carried out by research centres and youth work organisations working with LGBT youth. Then they asked 20 LGBT people between the ages of 15 and 18 about their experiences. They conducted surveys online, and using these methods, they received very personal experiences and stories, which they could then compare to the data they had already accumulated. Here are the Taille Research Group's findings.
more services for LGBT young people before coming out.
More awareness and consequences for LGBT bullying needs to be implemented in schools to allow LGBT people to flourish in the school environment.
A larger study needs to be done to raise awareness and fundraising for the programs and services that our LGBT youth need.
We want more education in schools supporting LGBT young people.
We need more information for young people to make them more aware of the importance of supporting their peers, as lack of support is a common issue faced by LGBT youth.
We need more information about homophobic bullying in schools.
Specifically about the use of homophobic slur words and how they affect young people.
So, so as you can see, that I think that speaks for itself in terms of an example of how you can use empathy as a model in working with young people. And I should acknowledge, of course, that that was done in partnership with Feroiga, with whom we partner in a lot of our work. And I acknowledge my colleague, Dr. Daniel Cannon, and Niamh Heary, who is the filmmaker. And indeed, the fact that Cillian Murphy spent a long time, as you can see, there was a drama influence in that I certainly wouldn't have had in terms of how you turn a research report into what I think is a very comprehensive way of getting a message across. So as I say, I'm using that really more as an example rather than anything else to highlight. What I think is really important in our lives is that no matter what the issue is, and that was just an example of one issue, there are many other issues we've actually looked at with youth on the empathy work. You know, I do, it's something that I'm very passionate about. And I think it's highly relevant too, is not just in terms of our work life, as I say, but also in our own lives as well, and how we survive COVID and move forward. Is that okay, John?
That's perfect, Pat. Pat, can I follow up with a question?
Yeah.
So we've got 130 HR managers from across Ireland's universities listening in. Is there such a thing as an empathic organization? Or what does empathy in an organization look like? What are the signs of an empathic place of employment?
Yeah, well, we're looking at that at the moment in terms of schools, particularly in relation to that project. But it has to do with 4 factors. One has to do with work culture, which is, you know, goes in various directions and deep and wide. One is about the social and emotional learning among the staff in terms of looking at these issues, which we very often don't think about. So very often when we interview somebody for a job, we interview them on the basis of their skills, and HR managers know exactly far more than I do about that. But you don't often think about the capacity of the person to show or demonstrate empathy. So I think that, you know, there's an issue about social and emotional learning. There's an issue about culture. Of course, the great news is that you can learn empathy. And, you know, adolescents particularly, we know from research, their brains are still growing, which is why they need to sleep more, which my mother, even though I'm youngest of 10, my mother didn't seem to understand that I needed to sleep more. But actually, because the adolescent brain is growing, you've got plasticity in the brain. And believe it or not, you can actually grow empathy in your brain. We know this from neuroscientists. So as adults, we can change and become more empathetic, and we can learn. So the third aspect, and the last aspect, of course, is about the opportunity. We need to provide the opportunity within organizations that this is taken as a really fundamental function, not an add-on function, not something nice if it's there, not something that's very soft, something that's actually an essential requirement.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks so much for joining us today from London and for sharing those insights and those thoughts, and indeed that very special project in Tala, which is, I think, has really helped us see empathy as an applied skill, how you apply it in terms of reaching out to people and really engaging with them. Folks, back to the room. We're a very quiet room now that our panelists have gone, and I only have 2 jobs left to do, he says as he reaches one last time for the top hat. Okay, folks, this is the big one. A €500 voucher for Monart Spa in County Wexford, sponsored by Cornmarket Financial Services. Oh, Nevin, this is, I've been on the edge of the seat for this one. Unfortunately, we are not in the mix, unfortunately. So one of you, lucky crowd watching in on us, is about to jump out of your seats with delight. Press the button, Nevin, we'll see who it is. If only we had a drum roll. The €500 Monart Spa voucher sponsored by Cornmarket is going to Kathy, you lucky duck in UCD. I don't think UCD won anything today, so that's the big one, Kathy. You must be screeching there. We won't turn on your microphone, don't worry. Thank you to Cornmarket for sponsoring that. And Kathy, we really hope you totally relax and unwind and disconnect while you're down there. Okay, hat off and back in the box. One last job to do, and that is to invite